Hello, my name is Max Rees. I'm here with Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm, and we're here to talk today about terrorism, national security and immigration. If you have any questions on other issues, we will deal with those in another section. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you.
Can you tell us what the policy of the Liberal Democrats is on immigration, and what is the policy towards refugees?
Yeah, so the Liberal Democrats' policy on immigration is we're broadly in favour of it. We think rather than have a quota based on bureaucrats deciding what skills we need, we should have a tariff, so people should pay. Generally in favour of skilled immigration, less convinced about family reunions. We also think we should have, our policy is to have free immigration agreements with other countries in addition to New Zealand. So at the moment, New Zealand citizens are entitled to live in Australia and work for as long as they like, and vice versa. We'd like to see similar arrangements with other countries that are compatible with our society. So to summarise, free immigration agreements and a tariff so that people pay to come here for permanent residence, and no welfare for non-citizens. Obviously there are a few exceptions in the case of refugees, but generally speaking, no welfare for non-citizens. So you wouldn't come to Australia and pay the fee if you didn't think you were going to be able to get a job and survive. On refugees, we don't have a very detailed policy as a party. My view is we are a wealthy country. We can afford to be compassionate. Compassion is an important part of a free civil society, a healthy civil society. And so bringing refugees to Australia, I think, is part of our acknowledgement that we have an obligation to our fellow man. The issue, of course, is which people should we show compassion to. I don't think we should allow the United Nations High Commission on Refugees to choose the right people. I think we should make our own minds up on those. And of course, there are some people who are more deserving of compassion than others. People that I think should be at the top of the list are those who've got absolutely nowhere else to go in the world, anywhere else. And that obviously includes the Yazidis, for example, Iraq, and Christians from the Middle East. They've got nowhere else to settle. Muslims from the Middle East, of course, there are a lot of other Muslim countries where they could go, and on that criteria, not that I've got anything against Muslims, but really they do have other places to go. There are plenty of other people who don't.
So to what extent is immigration linked to national security and terrorism?
They are linked. Unfortunately, many of the terrorists in Australia and also in other countries have been second generation rather than first generation. So the question about stopping immigration, whether that would stop terrorism, is more or less answered by that. But it is clear that there are small numbers of people from within the Islamic community who Daniel Pipes refers to them as Islamists, who are bent on jihad or holy war. They have something against Western society, and they're determined to destroy it. So the question is what to do about it. They're doing it in the name of Islam, but obviously most Muslims don't subscribe to them. They find support in the Quran and Hadith, but it's a bit like saying, well, all Catholics are pedophiles because some priests in the Catholic Church molested children, and then others covered up for them. It amounts to a cancer within the Islamic community, and they are the ones who primarily need to deal with it. They need to root it out, just in the same way that the Catholic Church is ridding itself of pedophiles, addressing what went wrong. It's an international problem, though. It's not just a national problem. It extends across boundaries. And for us in Australia, we need to be mindful of the fact that immigrants who bring those ideas with them or pick up those ideas once they're here are a threat to society. We need to do something about that. What sort of solutions can we adopt? I'm actually a believer in profiling. There are almost no terrorists who weren't male, weren't young and weren't Muslim. Although, as I said, it's not just immigrants. Some of them, quite a lot of them actually were born in the country. Risk assessment is the term, rather than profiling, used in other areas. Chemicals, drugs, pharmaceuticals, things like that. We use the term risk assessment. There's no reason why we couldn't use risk assessment, profiling, if you want to use that term, in relation to immigrants. Which ones are most likely to be dangerous, which ones are most likely to have, to harbour thoughts that are contrary to our values in Australia. We should be careful also about them having, those people who do have those thoughts, spreading the thoughts within the country. So if they get arrested and put in jail for any reason at all really, whether it's terrorism related or not, if they have a jihadist mindset, they should be housed with other people with the same mindset and not with people who don't have that mindset so that they can't infect them. And I think if we have an emphasis also on skilled immigration and only accept refugees with nowhere else to go, and we have citizenship, a high bar on citizenship, and our policy is for 10 years residence, 10 years permanent residence, not 4 years, which the government is now moving to, before people become citizens. The default position is no welfare until you become a citizen. I think that will focus their minds on earning an income, supporting their families, and not living on welfare and causing mayhem by letting off bombs and shooting people.
We have a question here from one of the participants, Keith. Wants to know, why not train Australian citizens in marketable skills? It's clear that employers and their training institutions are failing our citizens by relegating their responsibilities to outsiders.
This is an old argument that immigrants take jobs. By and large, that's not true. You can't rule that out in every case, but overall, immigrants create jobs because they add to economic activity and greater economic activity. They buy things, they need somewhere to live, they spend money, that creates jobs. Not all immigrants are equal though, and as I said, they broadly fall into the skilled immigrants category, for which we are absolutely in need of. We have needed skilled immigrants since 1788, and we still need them. And those who are not skilled, and primarily family reunions. My answer to that, as I discussed earlier, is we charge a tariff in particular for family reunions, so it could be quite a high fee, and no welfare until you become a citizen. And that would, I think, ensure that they are not a cost to the community. And yes, occasionally there will be immigrants who will take the jobs of somebody local. That's just the way it goes. Sometimes businesses fail because another business starts up as well. That's what we call capitalism. It's competition. It's normal.
So can you tell us what is wrong with the way the Australian government and other governments have been dealing with the threat of terrorism?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this, and I don't want to pretend that I have all the answers, but there are a number of things that I think they're doing wrong. First of all, in an attempt to control terrorism, there has been a series of bills go through the federal parliament which have taken away our liberty. I think that's a serious mistake. The terrorists are determined to kill off our liberty, to take away our liberty. And they don't believe in liberty. And so when we do it to ourselves in response to their activities, they are essentially winning. Examples include the metadata retention, detention without trial, the licensing of the security agencies to snoop and spy on us, onus of proof in a number of cases, removal of the right to silence in some cases, guilt by association, and we're all familiar with the searches and scans and things we go through when we travel by air. And then we see increases in police numbers and not always good police behaviour. And in Europe, not in Australia, in Europe, in Rome and other big capital cities in Italy and in France, you see troops on the street, and that's not necessarily healthy for democracy either. So I think those issues are important. What they're basically doing is allowing the terrorists and their approach to win. The other big area I think that we're making a mistake in is to treat everybody as equally at risk. And you see that at the airport, for example. There's lots of other examples, but you see little old ladies in wheelchairs or with walking sticks being subjected to the same amount of scrutiny, passing through the metal detectors time after time, setting them off with their artificial hips and all that sort of stuff, all the attention being focused on them. And yet, you know, there's never been a terrorist even remotely associated with little old ladies. In fact, very rarely with women. And if we treat them with the same care and scrutiny as we do those who are almost invariably associated with terrorism, which is young men, youngish men anyway. So I think profiling or risk assessments, which I think is a more correct term, would be a much better way to approach that. Yes, some people don't like it. In fact, the left of politics, they go off their brain over this whole issue of profiling. But it's not racist. You wouldn't necessarily do it based on a person's race. You know, brown people and black people are no more likely to become terrorists than white people. You might do it on the basis of religion, but of course that's not a race. You can only, a race is something you can't change. A religion is something you can change. It's a belief system.
Given the recent terrorist attacks in Westminster and then in Manchester, a lot of people are looking for answers on how to deal with the threat of terrorism. What is the Liberal Democrats' approach to security?
Well, arrest the people responsible, and I think the English police are rapidly doing that. Arrest those responsible, arrest those who helped them, put them in jail, and don't put them with people who are not radicalised Islamists, so they can't spread their virus. That's the most important thing. Deal with the risk of security while it's on, but then when there's no evidence that there's another imminent attack, relax the security. Don't get too intrusive. Don't let the terrorists win by imposing a loss of liberty on everybody else, supposedly in the name of security. Don't treat everybody as if they are all equally likely to be a terrorist. They're not. It's well known who is most likely to be a terrorist. And that's not to say Muslims are our enemy. They're not. They're our friends. They're the ones who will actually identify the ones who are dangerous. We must be very, very careful not to alienate those who will help us. But it is no different from the Catholics rooting out pedophiles. From within the Islamic community, they have to root out the jihadists, the Islamists. And we have to help them do it, encourage them to do it, put pressure on them to do it, persuade them that it's their moral obligation to do it, and we should make it easy for them to do it. So when they say, ring up somebody and say, I think my son, my daughter, my uncle, my father is becoming radicalised, we need to listen to that. We need to respond and deal with it.
We have a question here from James. What do you think of the CANSAC that's being promoted? Now, I assume that that's a new term to me. I'm assuming that that's something to do with Canada and the UK, some joint proposal that's been put forward. Are you aware of that at all?
Oh, I don't think I know it enough to comment on. No.
Okay, righto. Should we increase government funding to combat terrorism, or are there other ways for law enforcement to deal with these issues that don't require more and more of other people's money?
No, there's no evidence that more money is needed. The question is always, are we doing things right, or are we doing the right things? And if the security forces think it's their responsibility to do everything, then they'll do nothing well and leave a lot of gaps. they do have to be targeted, they do have to be focused, they have to identify genuine risks and focus on those risks. And this is where I come back to this argument I'm making in relation to risk assessment. That's why you do a risk assessment, so you can identify what the risks are and you can deal with the risks in proportion to their character. And you cannot deal with every single risk. And it does need to be acknowledged, I think, that if there's 100 lunatics out there who want to blow the place up and they find the means to do it, and it's hard to prevent them from doing it, you may not want to pay the price in terms of the cost, the number of the police, the intrusiveness of the police, the laws you have to subject yourself to prevent every single one of those 100 people from doing anybody any harm at all. We may not want to bear that cost, but it may be that we'll find 99 out of those 100 can be dealt with within an affordable cost. I don't want a society where we have a police officer on a second corner watching over us just in case just in case we're threatened by somebody. The other side of it, of course, is that we don't have any capacity to defend ourselves. We're all victims in Australia. We're not allowed to have a knife or a pepper spray or a mace or anything like that for our own defence, let alone a gun, of course. So we are entirely dependent in Australia on, and they are in the UK too, on having government people in uniform coming to their rescue. And that's not necessarily conducive either to either a healthy society or a society in which we have affordable security.
Ayaan Hirsi Ali recently cancelled a speaking tour in Australia due in part to security threats. The response from some on the left seemed to celebrate the fact that she cancelled her tour. Do you think those on the left have helped create an environment where it is deemed acceptable to threaten public speakers and bully venues into cancelling events?
I mean, the left's idea of threaten is to turn up and make a noise and invade the space and generally shout them down. Although that's that's undesirable, and it also is a denial of right of free speech. Of course, it's not a physical threat. The bigger threat is the people who agree with those ones who do that sort of thing, but then go further. And they're the ones, for example, who threatened Bill Leak. And it was a real and present threat. The police took it seriously, ended up moving house. And I suspect that was what was behind the cancellation of Ayaan Hirsi Ali's tour. It wasn't just the risk that then some pimple-faced idiots would turn up and shout her down, but that her physical safety would be threatened. This is a serious issue. We've got jihadists who are threatening the safety of people they disagree with, joining forces with those in the left in Australia and other countries for that matter, who want to shut down free speech. It's a dangerous combination.
Okay, thank you. That's all we have time for this afternoon. Senator David Leyonhjelm, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.